today we are joined with Greg. I'm sure a lot of you guys know him within the Hyrox community as he's the face behind RoxLife. So I'll let you sort of introduce yourself and just tell the people a little bit about sort of how RoxLife came about, and then maybe we can dig into what some useful takeaways that people can do for their next Hyrox.
Sure. All right. Okay. Thanks. So yeah, I'm Greg. I run RoxLife, which is roxlife.com. And we've got a YouTube channel, Instagram channel, a podcast coming soon, which is really just like all things Hyrox, articles about Hyrox improving performance, interviews with the athletes, news, and so on. So anything to do with Hyrox, like we're looking to write about it or do videos about it or talk about it. And it started, like I'd done my first Hyrox back in the end of last year. At Birmingham was my first one, and like from that moment I was just like hooked, like instantly knew like that I loved it, and I instantly knew that it was gonna be very, very popular. Like I could just see it growing. And then done another one in Manchester in, I think it was January of this year.
End of January,
yeah. And then after that, like again, could see it growing, and just really figured that like it would be good to have a website dedicated to this sport. Like, and getting early, had the best website for it, and at some point that's going to be a good thing to have for whatever reason. So yeah, I started that around, I don't know, I think it's February, March of this year. And I've been writing articles, doing interviews, videos, and so on ever since. And it's grown very well, and it's grown as has the sport. It's gone from, I saw some numbers yesterday that I think there was 680 athletes at London back in September last year, and then like they're going to have like 4,500 in the upcoming Birmingham London events. They're going to have like 7,000, I think, at the London 2023. So it's grown like 10x in like 18 months. And I think the UK, like, it's grown more than in Europe and the US, but yeah, it's doing very well. And yeah, so that's essentially what I do.
Yeah. And I sort of building on that, like because I was at the first London one, and just seeing the difference from that first one in last September to the London one at the end of in the summer, just the amount of growth and the speed seemed to be more like you say, specific to the UK. And even now with the latest race in New York, we've seen like some UK guys going out there and podium and doing well. Like, do you have any kind of thoughts on why it might be UK athletes or UK have taken to Hyrox specifically?
I mean, no, I've been asked that a few times. I think some of it probably comes down to just like the size of the country. I live down south. I'm very close to London, but I'm happy to travel to Manchester. It's not that much of a big deal. So I think we're a lot of us probably all the same. We're happy to travel around, where it's a bit easier here than going from whatever New York to California, for example. So I think that's probably played a part. And then as that does, like, word spreads a lot quicker. Like there's a lot of people down my gym that will be doing the upcoming London event, really probably because I am, and word has spread like just from person to person to person. So I think it just becomes like exponential in the end. And I suspect that other countries like Germany and America in particular will eventually get there, but it might just be a slower burn than it's been in the UK.
Yeah, kind of snowballed here, and
I think maybe as well. I mean, I don't really know, but I think some of it, I think our response to COVID and has been different to some other countries. So like we've probably opened up a little bit better than some other countries. Like, I can't say that with any certainty, but
yeah,
you know, we haven't particularly been impacted since Hyrox has been in the UK. Whereas I know like they had to cancel a Boston event last year because of it, essentially. So I
right,
think that's probably playing
yeah,
a part.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, because I mean, like, I sort of thought it might be like we do have like the turf games and the NFG, which you mentioned before, and it's had good responses to that. But like, if you sort of compare the growth to those other fitness competitions, Hyrox has just steamrolled it and kind of grown from way faster than these other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about that too. I mean, from my perspective, I love the standardization of the event compared to something like NFG. Like I love NFG, but and I've done that really. That was my focus for a few years, but I never truly knew if I was getting that much better at it or not. Like you can look at your placings, but it is hugely dependent on like the level of the competition on the day. Whereas I just know whether I'm getting better or not at Hyrox. So that for me, that's been a major like attractiveness of it. And I do think like credit to the Hyrox team overall, like their execution, like how well it's run, everything like that is like top drawer in my mind. Like the London event, like it's the biggest indoor fitness event ever, I think. Like there's 4,000 people there, and it ran like so smoothly. And so I think that's been a major factor in it as well. Like the team there, like the two co-founders, you've got Mo Förster and Christian Tuchka, like they to me they just seem like winners. Like they would make a success of anything that they did. So I think that's a factor as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So on that, like I love the way that you can track your progress from one to the other, and also sort of mimic it quite well in gyms. So what are some things that maybe people aren't factoring in when they're comparing races to simulations in the gym or races to races? What are some of those things that change, tangibles, sort of?
You mean like in terms of like if you were going to plan a simulation in the gym, like what things that people might forget
things
about?
to look out for that you might not consider, that when it comes to race day that could potentially change your time?
I get. I mean, if you haven't done one before, I guess like the main obvious thing that you'd forget is probably the rock zones. So like those transitions between running and the stations, and like properly accounting for the size of that rock zone. So I remember before I did my first event, I was aware of what it was, but I was like, yeah, I know I've got like faff about a bit, like going to get the sandbag and like as I leave the treadmill, for example, and I'm sure I'm accounting for it in that way. But then like as soon as I turned up and like you just like see the size of the rock zone and you're like, no, I probably weren't like fully accounting for this. So personally, when I do one now, I will run like 1,100 meters per run as opposed to a kilometer. Okay. So like which is, you know, obviously 8.8 kilometers that I'm running, and then you've still got like a little bit of faff, you know. Well, I have, at least, you know, getting sorting the sleds out, everything like that, and that has worked out well for me. Like I think it's like very representative in my gym of what the race is like. So making sure that you're doing 1.1 kilometers, because the race is 8.7 kilometers. Like they've said that they aim to standardize it so that you cover 8.7 kilometers in every race. So that's probably the primary thing. And then the other thing that you can never truly know how it's going to feel is the sleds. And like the sleds, the carpet, how that's going to feel, and to be honest, you're not going to know until you have done one. Just how much weight you need to put on your sled in the gym versus like what they have at Hyrox is almost certain to be heavier than your race weight, but you never truly know until you just felt it in the race.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think like that's one thing that you can't ignore is not only that say you're doing the simulations, you're only running 1K, you're sort of thinking, oh, okay, well, I'll tack on, say, another minute for the rock zone, but you're actually running it. If you're doing competitively, you are running it, and it's not only the time but the effort that takes out of you, accumulating over every single run.
Yeah.
So yeah,
there are probably other, like, maybe we don't, it's like too detailed to get into here, but there are other factors as well. Like, for example, at New York, they had the New York race at the weekend. That was 4 laps of the track. So that is on probably a busy track, right? So the difference between doing that and running a kilometre on a treadmill where you haven't got to turn any corners, no one's going to get in your way, none of that stuff going on. Like, there is a difference there. But I think I think there we're probably talking like, we're not talking like loads and loads of minutes, the impact of that. It's just like a factor that will differ in a simulation versus race day. And then there's the heat of the venue, all those kinds of things that can add up and are worth bearing in mind. But if you just want to do like a reasonably accurate simulation, I think you can do it just by taking account of the rock zone and the sleds.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and then kind of on that, like I like how we sort of you cover very like everything on the site. You've got like nearly an article on everything you can think of. Where are some of, especially for sort of novices or people that have done maybe if it's their first race, or maybe they've done one and they're looking to improve, where do you see the most sort of bang for their buck in terms of areas that they should focus on, rather than it can be quite easy to get caught up in, like you said, or are the sleds going to be heavier or slower this time, whereas realistically you're not going to know, and it's probably not the best thing to focus on. Where do you see the sort of biggest bang for your buck for beginners?
Yeah, if we're just talking about like purely, I look at a lot of the data from the races. So if we're talking about what looking at the data from the races is showing, and I've done some analysis where I compare like the top performers in the sport, what are they doing differently potentially to like someone who's more average, performing like averagely in terms of time. So there's a few things that stand out to me. One is pacing the race appropriately, and I think a lot of people probably are starting to appreciate that now, like in terms of, yeah, I know I mustn't go out too hot. People still do, but like I think there's that appreciation. Where I don't think people fully appreciate is like the consistency of the running that the elite athletes do. If you look at the top 5 elite athletes at the World Championships, how consistently they ran each kilometer versus even like the next 5 or average people, like it's dramatically different. So getting to a point where like you can run consistently throughout the race, I think is important and underappreciated. And it's like it's a tough place to get to, because you do need some experience in that, and you need to like maybe run some simulations and just work out where you think you can pace yourself. But it's important, and that is almost certainly going to mean like you feel like you're going too slow on the first couple of runs, but by the end of it, like you won't feel like that, and it just stops you from going out too hot, wearing yourself out too quickly, and screwing yourself over. So that's an important one, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think I can definitely testify to that. Like, I've kind of been trying to do a lot more 1K intervals and runs at my what I predict my race pace to be. So I think the best, I mean, the elite guys, they know pacing, they know um, what they're running at, and what that feels like. So that even though a station will compromise your run, and it might feel different, they're still running at the same pace. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that takes a lot of practice,
Mm-hmm.
but is definitely beneficial. Is knowing. I mean, I sort of say it with the row and the ski. It's really nice because you've got a screen and you can see what pace you're going at. You know, okay, this is the pace I've practiced. Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? But I think having an awareness of running speed is such an upper hand, and that can
Yeah.
really
And
pay off.
there's a few things like we could talk about there. There's one is like if you haven't done it, like just knowing how fast you should be running, and like
Mm,
aside from just doing simulations, you can like maybe probably when I first went into it, I thought, well, if I'm running a kilometer and then doing something else, running a kilometer, I might be able to do it at something close to my like 5K pace, which is
mm.
like I'm just wrong, you know. And
Yeah,
then um, and sort of that's so understanding what sort of place it's going to be. And to be fair, there is quite a broad spectrum here. Like I was talking to Rich Ryan the other day, and he says he's probably closer to his marathon pace,
yeah,
whereas Linda Meyer, who's just broke the world record in the women's pro, she told me she's somewhere between a 10K and a half marathon pace. So there
right,
is a
yeah,
variance here, and that might come down to like your background from
yeah,
running and so on. But just probably appreciating that it's at least somewhere between 10K pace and half and marathon pace, probably closer to half marathon. Most people is worth
mm,
appreciating, I think. Um, Personally, I do like what I found helps is like I do uh, periodically I do a test really to track my progress from a running perspective, where I run a 5K at 140 beats per minute, like using my heart rate strap, and just
mm-hmm,
sort of seeing like the time that I could do that in, and obviously I want to see it going quicker. And then after that, like rest for a few minutes, and then I will run a 1K at 155 beats per minute, which is about 85% of my max heart rate. So I'm sort of like in
mm-hmm.
that sort of threshold sort of area. Um, and I found that the pace that I run that kilometer at is a good pace for me in Hyrox. And that might just be like just me, specific to me. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that can be quite a good indicator, because I just know like 155 beats per minute. I know I can sit there for a while. It's still like pushing yourself, obviously, but that's worked out for me. So it's
Mm.
a good test anyway, just for tracking running progress, because it sort of takes out any of the like trying harder sort of element to it, or like if I was just going to go and do a 5K and just see if I'm getting better at my 5K, there are elements to that aside from
Yeah,
just physiological that could make me quicker, like in terms of the pacing, just like the mental side of it, everything like that. And you take almost all of that out by just doing it purely based on your heart rate.
all right, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's definitely a concept. I mean, um, I don't know if you've looked into Rich Diaz, who is the coach of who coached Hunter, and he does a lot of work on heart rate and energy systems, and the Hyrox is such a um, middle ground, that like that real cusp of blowing up,
yeah,
and just holding that lactate threshold for as long as you can. And I think yeah, I definitely think heart rate, getting a heart rate monitor and doing some threshold work, knowing where that is so important. And I definitely say it with a lot of the exercises, they're so easy to jack your heart rate up that you've got to be aware of that, and be aware that you only have, so many times that you can really spike that heart rate up before you're just going to be burnt out.
Yeah.
So like, with the sleds, with the burpees, strategically pausing to let your heart rate come back down, or and not going at too fast a pace that you just that you'll have to slow down, sort of thing.
Yeah,
I think
and again, a lot of this comes from experience. This is another thing I was talking with Rich Ryan about, but you start to learn where you can really start to push it. Do you continue, like most people, like I think most people appreciate you should hold back a bit on the ski, and then like hold back a bit on the sled push, but where do you really start to send it?
Let it go, yeah.
Is it burpees like midway through the race, or is that going to be too soon for you? Like, is it on the lunges? Like, how much do you push it on the lunges? Bearing in mind, like, you've only got a kilometer and the wall balls left, but like, if you can't run that kilometer, you can't run that kilometer. So there's that. Yeah. There's that you need to learn about as well. It's not just all down to the running. It's like, when can you push, and how hard can you push on each exercise?
Yeah, and I've also found with coaching some of the doubles guys, as well as the pro and the open, it's different depending on what category you're in. It's like, if you're doing the doubles, the wall balls don't become such a factor as they do with singles. So that last run is almost your sprint finish, and then the wall balls is something that you just have to get done. It's normally, like, if you're competitive, and as a doubles, you're definitely doing the wall balls unbroken between the two of you. So it's not a case of, you can't, there's a limit to how fast you can go on the wall balls, but there's no limit to how fast you can run that last kilometer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it's a world of difference, actually. Like the doubles versus individual is. I remember when I first did a doubles, I was just like, wow, look, like this is a quite a different event in terms of it, like how much you can push yourself and that.
Yeah. And I think just knowing, having an awareness of that. I mean, I know Hyrox kind of pitch it as, if you're a beginner or new to it, try the doubles, then try the open, and then try the pro. But I know yourself and like Denise was saying, they're very different events in terms of, there's not necessarily one's harder than the other, but it's a case of how much can you push yourself within that domain.
Yeah, definitely. Just to go back to your, like, we sort of drifted off your question about some of the other, like, sort of performance metrics, if you like, that have come up. Aside from pacing, another one that came up was someone's sled pull to sled push ratio. So if you look at what the elites are doing, their sled pull time and their sled push time are much more closely related to each other than like an average athlete typically. Now that can show a couple of different things. And in general, it looked like an average athlete was spending much longer on the sled pull relative to their sled push. Now that could be a couple of things. It could be just because there is a bit more technique required on the sled pull than the sled push, in which case people should make sure that they're focusing on, like, the technique on that side of things. And I know you've done some good stuff, actually. That your video recently on that was really good. And it also comes down to pacing as well. Again, I think, like, going back to that pacing issue, like, I think a lot of people are going into that sled push, like the second station, and like pushing as hard as they possibly can, and then like frying their legs afterwards, and like they're just struggling to recover. Whereas I think like some of the elite level athletes and more experienced athletes know that they need to hold back a little bit on that sled push. Then they're not going as fast as they possibly could. A lot of them, you know. So, and that just brings that sled pull and sled push time a bit more aligned than where like an average athlete might do, that just goes and smashes the sled push as quickly as they can, and then like they've worn themselves out, and then maybe they've not even got the technique on the pull, so that just like makes that ratio vastly different.
Yeah. No, I would agree, and I think it's so hard, like to when you're in that atmosphere, hold back, especially on something where like the sled, you know, you feel like you can like you got to hammer it to get through it, and you got like the crowd and it's buzzing. Where I know like my brothers did it, and I'm sort of coaching them through it, cheering them on, and I'm sort of like you know, hold back on the sleds, and then like more towards the by the time we got to the farmers, I was like, now you go,
Yeah.
now you go.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
like now, like let's amp up, let's get loud for the back half, because of that's when you need it. Yeah. And you're right. Like I think with the rope pull, there's a certain amount of time, but I do think there's a lot of time that you can create from just hustling faster, like with the technique, and like you know, the sled push is very standard. You're just going to hit that. There's almost if you're not thinking about it, you can lose seconds putting the rope down, walking forward. The walk between lengths is a big one, where you might not feel like you're going slow, but you could definitely go faster and probably not take that much out of you. It's not actually a fitness thing as opposed to like a focus thing. That's another.
Definitely. Like the sort of the proportion of time that someone spends on the sled pull versus like the amount of time that they are actually pulling the sled. And it's a good point. It's like something to actually be aware of and hustle. Like that's something I've actually been practicing in the gym in recent weeks, just like really like pushing it. Because you don't screw yourself over quite so badly either for the rest of the race by doing that. It's not, you don't completely fry your legs generally, like you would on a sled push, on the sled pull.
Yeah, cool.
And then, sorry, then just one other thing I was going to mention, and I know this has been talked about a fair amount, but the rock zone, like the amount of time that people spend in the rock zone, and that's even when you consider like they run slower than an elite athlete, like the amount of time that they spend in the rock zone relative to their overall running time is much slower than an elite. And I think awareness of that is quite important. So like it is real. It is contributing towards your overall finishing time, and it's very easy to just like finish runs, get into that rock zone, and just like relax, and then just like dawdle to the station, then like push it in the station. But like that is real time that you're wasting. So being aware of that, like you actually do, it is worth running through if you can, obviously, and then like just being conscious. That's where the drinks are. That's where the water is. Being conscious of, do you really need to stop for water as often as you are? Do you need to stop as long as you are for the water? Like, and have you like hydrated as well as you possibly can in the days leading up to the race, so that you don't need a ton of water during the race?
No, definitely. And I think to add to that, like just going down to a slow pace, a walk or a stop, makes it that much more difficult to get going again and to hold that consistent pace that we talked about. Like if we know the best people are holding a consistent pace, then slowing down, even though you feel like you're saving energy, is taken away from that I always I've been doing a lot of work on running cadence and keeping to a trying to get as close to 180 steps per minute as I can, and holding that throughout. So even if my run it's as such is slow, I'm still getting that leg turnover. I'm still holding a decent cadence, flushing my legs out, and then as I start to feel better, I can creep that speed up.
I think that's important. Like it's probably appreciating that you probably will start to feel better. Just get through those whatever first 10 seconds of running after the lunges, and it will get better. Like it's like forcing yourself to just like run through that initial thing.
That is it, 100%. I mean, like when I'm teaching classes, that's one thing that I'm always shouting out, like, hold on a little bit more, it will get better, try and hold that pace. And yeah, you're right, the more you do that, the more you can realize that when it will get better and when you are pushing too hard, because we talked about obviously not blowing up, but it's often on the stations that you blow up, not necessarily the run. But yeah. Okay, was there any other sort of things that you had down for time savers?
In terms of like the data, like I think they are probably the main points to consider,
the biggest ones.
Like there's obviously like there's lots of things to consider away from the data, like preparing for heavy sleds, being conscious that they probably are going to be heavy, and like not letting that mentally screw with you if they're heavier than maybe you've been expecting. I think that's important. I think there's elements like preparing appropriately for the race, like not turning the hour before the race into a mad panic, and like making sure like you've got your timing chip around your leg, and your bags in the locker, and you've been to the toilet and all that sort of stuff. So it is very, very easy to turn even like that last 10-15 minutes before a race into a mad panic. I think that's worth considering for a beginner, they're the ones that spring to mind off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah. Sort of. All right then. Sort of segue into a slightly different topic. I'm sure you're going to do a break, or you might have already done a breakdown video on the New York race. But we did see some different things, like the it was going to be a run outside, but that got changed to inside. But the thing I was most intrigued about was this the Go Ruck race, and kind of the how did you think that went, and do you think that's going to be something that will be expanded upon, or just kind of a one-off?
It remains to be seen. I mean, like, there's been talk about will they ever change the event and so on, and like they've said, they don't really want to change anything unless they truly have to, which makes sense. It's a sport, and they don't change triathlons and stuff like that. The Go Ruck is like an interesting one. I weren't like mad excited about the idea when I first saw it. In all honesty, it's like it doesn't make it hugely different if you're doing the open in a weighted vest. How much truly different is that to doing like the pro, for example? Like, and I appreciate it is, but it's not like wildly different event or anything like that. So there's probably a monetary factor behind it. I'm sure like Go Ruck are paying some sort of sponsorship and selling vests out of it. And I suspect that there will be more of it, like at the events. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. Whether it's just in America that they do it or not remains to be seen. I don't think there's any talk of it in the UK events, and I don't think they put it into London one for April next year. So it might just be in the US at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I mean, one thing that I'm a bit conscious of as they came out with it, and what we've sort of seen with so the new London one will be over 2 days, and I know people are thinking about doing both days, doing different events on both days, and with the sort of like the weighted vest is another challenge and another extra. I'm kind of, as a coach, I'm straight away thinking, how much of this is healthy? How much is pushing it like just to make it harder and just to make it even harder? And I think it's something like I've found I really like Hyrox and pushing people towards Hyrox because of I know that it's such a well balanced event. Like there's running, jumping, pushing, pulling, endurance, strength. So I know where I'm quite comfortable in saying, yeah, go for it. Whereas I'm not necessarily with turf games or national fitness games. I feel like you have to have a bit of an understanding of what you're getting yourself into. And yeah, it just worries me a bit, like running with a weight vest, like how much damage are you taking if you're trying to if you're doing a lot of race prep with a weight vest on, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it changes like your cadence, everything like that. Apparently, like doing the burpees was disgusting. Apparently.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. You're right. Like from a coach perspective, you're like, I know they've talked about in the past, like there was actually a lot more thought than I think people appreciate that went into the original concepts, like the length of it, the fact it's 8K, the specific exercises, the fact that they've made them safe for everyone, and all those kind of things. That there is a lot of thought that's gone behind it. And when I've spent time thinking about, well, what would I change? And it is actually, I found it quite hard, like knowing what I would put in instead of something else. If you take into account things like safety and having like a load of people do it in a day, you can't have box jumps because people will be tripping over, and like they've talked about tire flips and monkey bars that not everyone can do and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
it is quite hard to think about a ton of other stuff that you would put into it. So I think it's a very good concept. I like the go ruck idea isn't something that I would have particularly like jumped about putting in. I think there is the possibility maybe for like a half Hyrox where you do 500-meter runs and it's just a more quicker intense event. And I think there's the potential for like a double Hyrox for some people, like a Hyrox Ultra or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
but I also understand like why that's not the concept. Like I've heard Christian talk about before, like if it for something that's lasts whatever hour and a half on average, if you double that, then like the training requirements and everything like that becomes quite significant to do. Like the time commitment needed to do say a 3-hour event is significantly different to what you need to do an hour and a half event. So I see why that hasn't made it into the original concept, but I think there is potential for some athletes to do that eventually.
Yeah, I do think so, and I think it's that sort of ratio of strength and endurance where I think, I mean, I don't know whether it's more just because I'm coming from a strength background, but I do feel it is still more endurance based. There is that that side of, I think, in the beginning where CrossFit athletes could actually jump in and do quite well because they have that strength base. And some of the runners were really caught up by the by the amount of weight on the sleds. But I think as all it took was the runners to do a little bit of strength training, and then they're outperforming the CrossFitters that haven't got that endurance base, and I think it's then very hard for them to catch up. So I think a shorter event that's still running and strength based. Yes, you might see a different build of athlete that's winning, and I think I think the I think there is potential for going even shorter, heavier, but I would say later down the line, I think like you have different race distances for athletics, like have different race distances for Hyrox. Yeah.
I mean, I do think there is a good mix of athletes that does well at Hyrox. So I think it's not, you're not looking at the Elite 15 and only seeing small, slight runners, for example. Like the mix is good. Like Hunter is a bit of a freak, to be fair. Like, but he's the best, and he's big, he's muscular,
exactly,
he's strong. But and over time this might change, but I think there is a very good mix. Like even if you look at the men and the women's winners last year, so you've got Hunter, he's a big guy, strong, but you've got Chris, who's like much more slight athlete. She's certainly not the strongest female in that race. So I think it shows that it is quite a hybrid event that suits a range of athletes. That said, I do think probably over time, I think you probably will see like the runners, and I think that will suit like those with like a bigger engine, like the runners a little bit more than maybe what we're seeing at the moment. But remains to be seen. I think if someone's going to break Hunter's world record, for example, I think that's going to be done. Like, I think the primary improvement that they're going to do over and above his time is going to be on the running side of things, as opposed to what he's done like in the stations. Because the stations, you're getting to a point where he's just like limited physically in how quickly it can be done. How quickly can you do 100 lunges? Like there's just a limit, and similar with the wall balls. Like I don't know if on the world record he went unbroken, but if he did, like, you can't really do it much quicker than that, So I think it probably will come down to the running, and just finding someone that can run quicker than him, but is as strong. But maybe you don't need to be as strong as him. You just need to be strong enough,
Yeah, I do think, like you say, there is strong enough. There is that that cap sort of thing of like. I don't think we really know at the moment what strong enough is, but I do think there is a point of limiting returns.
I was talking I was talking about this with Rich again. So I've got a video coming up where we talk about how fast can you guys run, like 5K, 10K, half marathon, and how much can you lift deadlift wise and so on. And like they're quick runners, but from a strength perspective, I found it quite interesting. Where these are off the top of my head, but he's talking about maybe they're about their deadlift, for example, 1 rep max would range from maybe 150 kilograms up to I think Hunter's done like 220 maybe. So there is a big range there. And 150 ain't like crazy strong by any means, is it? So there's a good range there, and like I say, I don't think they're not like absolute beasts. Like, I mean, what can you deadlift for 1 rep max? You're at the top end of that, right?
Well, I've done, I mean, like recently just cracked 200, which I was really pleased with. But I mean, I think like with what I'm excited to see is we're aware of those metrics, like what you can do the run in, what you can do the strength stuff in. Like do you feel like eventually we're going to see like those come together in terms of like you're almost doing the whole race unbroken, of like there is no pauses, or do you think at what point do you think these times are going to slow down? Uh, I mean,
How do you mean? Are they going to be?
so for example, like the last few years, the record's been broken every year because it's
Right.
still a new sport. And I think, people are learning it more. They're breaking the records based on I think them knowing it more rather than like human potential kind of
Mhm.
aspect. So I mean, you've dug more into record breaking stats.
Well, I think we'll yeah for probably a few years. I think we'll see the records continue to be broken. I think this season we'll see a lot of it because
Yeah,
I think that like the popularity and everyone's had the off season, and then maybe it will die down. Maybe we'll see a ton in the first few races this year, like we did in the
yeah,
first race,
yeah,
and then it might die down a bit. Like my gut feel, like Hunter's world record is particularly special, and
yeah.
I'm not sure how quickly that will be broken. Um, and the women's
Mm.
one is special as well, but I think like Hunter's is like that next level. Personally, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely had a gap on the field.
yeah, and then over time, I mean, assuming that the sport continues to grow and it continues to be popular, you're going to get essentially what you're getting with the CrossFit Games now, where
Mm.
there's some people that have been doing this like I don't know, like say from the age of 13 or something like that, and they're just like
Mm.
they're just they've been primed for Hyrox,
Yeah.
and like they're just physically perfect for it. So I think you certainly will get the records continually be broken. And that's just going to come down to the popularity and like the kids coming up really,
Yeah.
because you got. I mean, I don't know CrossFit that well to be fair, but I know there's like some 18-year-olds in it right now that are
Yeah.
like smashing it, right?
Mm.
So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like you're seeing, I mean, I don't know how long CrossFit has been going on for, but there are records still being broken like in
okay,
nearly every year. Like, and they're making the weight standard higher and higher
yeah,
each time.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, it's exciting. It's exciting. I'm a bit aware that I'm keeping you. So, are there anything else you wanted to cover? I think we
No,
covered a lot
I
of
think we're good.
topics.
I mean, one thing that's at the top of my mind at the moment is um, because we're only like a couple of weeks out, say from the next event.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so much adaptations that you can make in that sort of time, right? You can screw it up by doing too much or whatever. But there's not a lot training wise that you can do. So I think
Mm.
thinking about an appropriate taper is
Yeah.
important, which I've written about, and I'm sure like you can talk about probably more than me in reality. And then also like the other thing that I've been sort of playing around with is the heat element of Hyrox. So it does get hot inside the venues, and it gets hot just when you're
Mm-hmm.
training for it. So preparing. I've been preparing myself for that. Like if you look at some of the science behind it, you can start to make adaptations to heat
Mm.
in only a few weeks. Um,
Mm.
so in some of my training sessions at the moment, I've been more conscious to sort of avoid the air conditioning and avoid the fans and getting more used to just like training in the heat in the hope to like get some sort of adaptation to doing that in the last few weeks before the race. And then also like getting a bit more used to not taking on a ton of fluid during my training sessions, um, because I don't want to be stopping too much in the rock zone during the race. And like just I think there's a psychological element to that as well as physiological in
Yeah.
terms of like just not needing the water. So I've been playing around with that a little bit in the last probably a couple of weeks really. Yeah.
No, I definitely think that's important, and I think it's definitely relevant as we're going into it. Well, in the UK at least, we're going into the winter, colder months, and a lot of people do the running outside. I've definitely found there's a much bigger difference between what you need when it's cool and what you compared to the Hyrox where you are sweating a ton. And I think I mean, like, I've spoken to someone that's one of my clients has done the London Marathon, and he's also done the Hyrox and had some problems with cramps. And I think it's definitely not something to overlook how much fluid you're taking in, and how much before and replenishing after training is definitely something to consider. I know myself, I've even done like I've weighed myself before a simulation and after, and like I can lose up to a kilo of and that's just water and fluids, and so knowing that I need to take that back on before doing something, before training again. And that article is definitely interesting. One thing that I did pick up on, which I hadn't seen before, is you mentioned a supplement, tyrosine.
Tyrosine, yeah.
Have you had much experience with that? Have you been trying it?
Personally, I've not actually, to be honest. It was like I was researching the article, and I use examine.com a lot, which has got a lot of good research around supplements, and there was some studies which aren't conclusive. So like I can't like jump around and say this is the world's greatest supplement. But there's some research that suggests it might like help you cope with exercising in the heat essentially, and coping with the heat. So it could be worth experimenting with if you wanted to go down that route. I think some studies like quite interesting, and some studies sort of show it's no help at all. But there might be something individual there. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, cool. And I would just say to people that if they are interested in that or other supplements and water and taking on different amounts, is definitely test it before racing. You never want to take something that you haven't tried before on race day, because it's why risk it. You don't know what effect is going to have.
100%.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Anything else that you wanted to cover?
No, nothing in particular. I guess just following on from that, sort of what can you do in the few weeks before the race?
Right.
I mean, I guess there's you could start thinking about like the time of day that you're going to be competing. Like I know for you're going to be competing quite late at night, but for me that would be a drastic change. Like I train in the morning, so I would probably personally be thinking about like moving some of my training sessions to sort of the time that I'm going to be competing, just to get used to that. And then I also am quite interested in like the mental side of sport. I think it's worth thinking about how will you cope if a certain situation happens in the race. Like, are you going to lose your mind if the judge keeps no repping you on the wall balls? And what happens if the sled is heavier than you think? What happens if you get tripped over on one of the runs? Or like think through all the possible scenarios that could happen in your race, and then think about how you're mentally going to cope with that. Because probably nothing is probably not going to go perfectly.
It's not going to go perfect. No. There's
a lot
many
of
elements to it.
Yeah. And there's in sport, like you could talk about visualization, like how I want this race to go, or how I want this shot to go, and all those kinds of things. but I think you should also think about what happens if it don't go perfectly as well, and how you're mentally going to cope with that. So these are all things like you can be doing in these days before the race.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if you forget to, I don't know, chalk your hands and tons of stuff? What if you forget to put your timing chip on your ankle before the race? Like, what are you going to do? So, so yeah, think through some of those things as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's massive, and I think the Hyrox is a long enough event that that a change, that your mindset can massively affect it. And I think one thing where a lot of people, we said a lot of people come out too hot, but that's not the end of the race. And when you're going around those runs thinking, okay, yeah, I have come out too fast, so now what am I going to do about it? It's not game over. And yeah, I mean, definitely, like also running an extra lap or missing a lap is big things, but it happens to so many that it's not the end of your race. And not letting that negative mindset then affect your performance. You've got to stay. You've got to stay present with it.
There's a really good example of that actually at the weekend in the New York race, the women's pro. I'm forgetting her full name, Meg. Like basically came in a lap early on one of them, and so sort of like it was around halfway, and she realised like she'd got the 3-minute penalty, but like she didn't in any way let that screw up the rest of her race. She just like continued to smash it. It looked like it spurred her on more than like set her back, if anything.
Yeah.
And then like she still finished second. She would have won it if it weren't for that penalty, but like she was very close to winning it anyway. And it just like didn't deter her at all. Whereas I think for some other people, like who weren't quite so mentally prepared for something like that, like it could have just like absolutely ruined them. So
yeah, absolutely. And then there's still like benefits to take away from it, rather than a case of, I think a lot of people do have done a lot of training for this, and it's almost a lot of pressure on the day that you think that if something goes wrong, that's all that training wasted. Whereas if something goes wrong, it's down to you to sort of decide, okay, like how am I going to respond to these things going wrong, rather than let that dictate my experience. And I think there's a famous Michael Phelps story of he set a world record blind because of when he jumped into the water, the water filled up his goggles, but he was so prepared for that he'd trained for it, and he could go ahead and smash that. So it's these things of, in sport, there's so many times where everything goes wrong that you have to prepare for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, do you want to leave it on that note?
Yeah, that's cool, mate.
Okay, where can people find RoxLife and read all the blogs, watch all the videos?
Yeah, it says roxlife.com. It's RoxLife.com. We're at the RoxLife on Instagram. We've got a YouTube channel as well. I've been setting up a podcast this morning where I'm putting all the YouTube interviews and so on as well. So you should be able to find those on wherever you get your podcasts as well, hopefully, if I've done it right. And
excited for that.
Yeah, that's it, I think.
Cool, nice. And then, as always with me, you can find me on YouTube or Instagram at Woodsy Workout, where I'll put plenty more tips and tricks on all things health and fitness.